talk for half an hour, I wanted to start with a question to you. So what are 3 examples, hopefully you've done some pre-reading, of identity security as a challenge linking back to SailPoint or IGA solutions? First taker, what's an example of identity security, like a security event, and how that can relate to identity security? So something in cybersecurity that relates to identity security.
Compromised account.
Compromised account, excellent. Identities have accounts and they can be compromised. Absolutely a security thing. Any other examples that you can think of, and then we'll use that during the presentation as we go through. 3, 2, 1. All right, compromised accounts. It's a good start. We've got 1. So let's start off with some statistics to do with the challenge. Hopefully these will hold most of you in the room, or at least captivate some of you that haven't read about it. So 90%. These are organizations that have reported an identity breach. So a really strong link from identity to security. 86% identity breaches are linked to stolen credentials. So Will's mention there of the compromised account. It's a really strong connection line between the two. Oh, I'm one behind you guys. 74%, Forbes estimates that data breaches involve privileged credentials. So also the 4th one along here, the 30%, that is, if you remember from one of the big sessions we had in the big room, we were talking about the horizons of identity, the horizons report, how mature customers are. Wow, we're expecting more people, that's amazing. According to that McKinsey research, 30% of workforce identities are completely ungoverned. So a really surprising statistic there. And 62% of third-party identities are ungoverned. I see a few phones up. That's good. So anytime we see those kinds of impacts, like, hey, the problem's really big, we work in a capitalist society, so we want to equate that back to money. So in one study predicted 9.5 trillion predicted associated costs with cybercrime. And I'm sure if you stack this up to the moon, it would go very far and so on. But some other ways to try and conceptualize this amount of money is, if cybercrime was a nation, it would be the 3rd largest in the world. If cybercrime was compared to the illicit drug trade, it would make more money than all illicit drugs in the world combined. But the cost of cybercrime is just massive. So, hopefully, that's drawn your attention and clearly has gotten them to bring out more chairs for more people that are coming. It's good. One laugh, that's excellent. That's getting my ticks off. I've got an answer, I've got a laugh. It's good. Let's see what else we can get. So I guess jumping back to those statistics, that common theme that I was trying to line up with those statistics is that identity is a core a part of it. And that's the challenge that we want to draw out in this presentation, to link those two, cybersecurity and identity. How do those two meet? So we've talked a little bit about the challenge. Now let's move on to what the techniques are. So for this, we're going to introduce the cyber kill chain. Wow, welcome. More people, that's great. So we've just spent a moment, for those coming in, we've just spent a moment talking about the challenge. In cybersecurity, we have many identities that are unmanaged, and identity-related breaches are the vast majority of breaches, and we're about to talk about a little bit about how those breaches occur. So the cyber kill chain. So I guess this is about a sequence of events that, should all of those events be completed, you would have a successful breach at the end of it. So this is looking from the bad actor side or from the internal threat side. That's the perspective of the cyber kill chain. But to look at that from our side, hopefully from our side, the defender's side, that means that if we look at that chain of events that lead to a successful breach, if we can disrupt any of those links in the chain, then we stop the breach from occurring. So, if we, the kill chain was originally popularized in military circles, and you can think about it even in that physical sense. You could hide yourself using camouflage to stop yourself from being seen. You could put up walls to make it hard for you to get in, and so on. But of course, we're talking about a different adversary. And I'm behind on my slides. And this is the adversary that was often painted, especially in the last decade, of what we're fighting against. Thinking about someone with their hoodie on in a dark room. They've got a hard disk at their side full of rootkits and 0 days. They're ready to hack in and break all of your firewalls and do all those magic coding things. But the reality is, and hopefully you remember this phrase from earlier today, often they're not hacking in, they're just signing in. So if we think back to those statistics I mentioned earlier, and for those who are joining us and have joined us after I talked about statistics, we talked about how 30% of workforce identities are often left completely ungoverned, just unchecked. 62% of third parties, so your humans but that are not direct employees of your organization, the organizations you look after, are ungoverned. So there's just so many ripe targets for the bad actors, or also for the internal threats to be able to build. And another statistic from earlier, I think, was 86% of the time stolen credentials are used. So again, linking strongly back to that identity challenge. So more on the how we linking cybersecurity to identity. There's a whole bunch of frameworks which really intelligent people have worked really hard on to understand what that cyber kill chain looked like. There is Lockheed Martin, there is the MITRE ATT&CK framework. Today, I'm going to be utilizing the MITRE ATT&CK framework, but there's a whole heap of these that you can go out and look at if you're, say, wanting to take this to your board or to your CIO, or you're selling it to your next customer. You can actually use these frameworks to help them understand why identity is probably the most important component of their cybersecurity portfolio. So let's have a look at one of the attack matrices from the MITRE framework. So unfortunately it's a rather small font, but these are a whole bunch of these different chains along that kill chain. So there's a whole sequence of events that could play out, and I don't know whether you'll be able to see it, but the second row actually has the number of techniques that are available in each of these. So for example, this one up here, credential access. Well, there's 17 techniques to do that. If we look at execution, there's 14 techniques. But only one of each of these techniques needs to be successful from each of these to be able to get to that particular type of breach to be successful. So it could be like, they use a phishing email as the way to get the credential, would be one example of a technique that is strongly related back to identity. So, yes, example of what I just talked about. If we can break one link in this chain, we're going to be able to stop the entire breach from happening, and also we want that to be happening as early in the chain as possible, because then those people are going to do less damage or get less data. Hopefully none if we get to do it really early on. So that was, I guess, a little bit about the framework, or our framework that we can use. But another framework that there's been a lot of talk about over the last at least decade, possibly two, is the Zero Trust framework. And I want to introduce that because that helps us to start to map these cybersecurity frameworks and techniques back to identity. So I've talked about the challenge in terms of cybersecurity, the cost and the risk that we currently have. I've talked just now a little bit about the cyber kill chain, what that is, what that looks like. Now let's talk about zero trust, and at the end I'll bring it all together for us. So hopefully everyone in the room has seen this sort of diagram before, and you understand these basic concepts from zero trust. All users must be verified and authenticated. We want to know who someone is. Just enough, a really key one in our space. We want to make sure people only have the access they need to be able to do whatever the task is, or they could be a machine, right? Whatever it is, we want to limit that access. Just in time. So we also don't want there to be standing privileges, sitting around just available for people to use, and continuously monitor. So we want to be able to change our response based on the current level of risk, not last year's level of risk or yesterday's level of risk. It needs to be about today, continuously monitoring. So that, of course, is the zero trust methodology, but how does that relate to identity security? Well, let's go through each of these areas. So if we talk about the always verify in the top left, we want to validate that the identity is up to date. Using HR feed, non-employee risk management, machine identity security for our machine accounts. We want to make sure that all of our identity attributes are up to sync, because we can use that to drive lifecycle, we can use that to drive roles. There's a whole bunch of power in that. So on the left you have some of those items there. Next, just enough. Probably the key component of this, there are many different pieces though, would be roles. How are we doing role-based access within our organization? Are we leveraging AI to help us define those roles faster and to be able to keep up with the pace that the business changes? Because as I tell many of the prospects that I talk to, if it takes you 6 months to define a role and it gets out of date in 6 months, you're never actually increasing security. You're never actually getting the outcomes you want. Just-in-time provisioning. So the green one down here on the bottom right. How are we making sure that we remove access in a timely measure? Doing things like you potentially would have heard about earlier today, privileged task automation, so we can give someone the access they need for only the time that they need it. Even things as basic as sunset dates on access requests can be a huge risk reduction piece in this. And continuously monitor. So if we think a little bit about, for example, SailPoint identity risk, and SailPoint also has risk connectors, where we're able to bring in other indicators from other identity products and use that, because we have the context of how risky a user is. For example, Derek, we know, SailPoint knows how much access he has, but maybe say an email solution might know whether or not he's clicked on that phishing email. If it can inform us, we know what to do about that because we have the context of the risk he poses to the organization. All right, bridging the gap. So we were talking about identity security being the foundational component. For those of you who were in the last session with Will, you would have heard about the identity framework. So it's something Gartner has been talking about for a couple of years, about how we as organizations need to take a step back when we're thinking about identity and not just be going, hey, I'm going to solve that compliance issue, I'm going to roll out roles, I'm going to do these specific things, but hey, how can I have an orchestrated response to the cyber threats that are coming in, since most of them will at some point in the kill chain be related to identity. So it's going to give me the advantage against the adversaries. I've alluded to the context and the threat sensor there, the forensic information, because identity security has the history of the access someone's had. We have a whole lot of context, and the integration of all of those different components. Any questions so far? I know there was a bunch of people who came in. Any additional questions yet? Did you say you had one? No, you're all good. Okay, excellent. So let's have a look at some actual examples. So, the actual events from the MITRE ATT&CK framework, from the kill chain, and what are some examples that link those back to identity security? So the first technique is reconnaissance. And there's a bunch of, the first step is reconnaissance, and there's a bunch of techniques that can be used. Now, unfortunately, many of the reconnaissance techniques that are used are completely out of our control. We can't tell whether someone goes and looks on Facebook to see whether your employees have put their last name or date of birth up there, things like that. That's a lot harder. But there are some things that we're able to use as input and help us. So active techniques such as I mentioned before, phishing for information, we have tools that can see that. But they're only seeing that at an account level. So earlier I used the example of Dirk and maybe clicking on an email. The tool that monitors his clicking on that link, that understands his account. But it doesn't understand his identity, all the other accounts and all the other access he has, which is why it needs to come back to identity security to give it that broader context to choose what the response should be in that particular case. All right. Click. Excellent. Another step in the kill chain is resource development. So this is a bunch of techniques the attackers use to compromise resources or support their targeting. So it could be infrastructure, could be accounts. Linking back to Will's initial thing, we didn't plan this. Compromised accounts. That's a technique that focuses on existing accounts with existing access. So they might have a look for orphaned accounts. If you remember back early on, I mentioned 30% of workforce and 68% of third-party IDs are often completely ungoverned in most of our organizations. So it's very easy to find these little accounts left here and there with that standing access. So if we link it back to identity security, what do our termination flows look like? What does our movers flow look like? Are we leaving accounts and access out there just for the taking? We need to have solutions like SailPoint Identity Risk that are able to also detect anomalous activity so that when the account is compromised, that gets fed into us. We can understand that, contextualize that, and take the appropriate action. If an existing account was to be compromised and the access was to be acquired, we could use SailPoint's native change detection to see whether or not additional access is being added to that account or attributes are being changed. All these little things that might go unnoticed. And then again, bring that back to the broader context of the access that user has so that we can give an appropriate response. Establish accounts. This also comes back to things like native change detection. So a bad actor might want to go and create their own account, right? Hide it. They figure out from a document that got leaked what the naming convention is. So they could go out and create an account that's exactly the naming convention. The AD admins are going to refresh the OU. They're not going to notice anything different. But we can. Because we know that didn't come through the official request process. We know that person didn't come from HR or non-employee risk management. So we can take the appropriate response. Oh, it's a domain admin account. We'll shut it down immediately. Oh, it's a user account with no permissions. Inform cybersecurity. Whatever action needs to be taken based on the risk that particular account or identity poses. Another step in that cyber kill chain is gaining that initial access. So they're going to be wanting to have access to the network. If they can complete this step, they'll have that foothold in your infrastructure. One analogy that I sometimes use when I'm talking to customers or prospects is you might, if you wanted to hijack a car, you might walk by and try that car and try that car and try that car, but eventually you'll probably find a car that's unlocked and then you're in. And so this is what this step is about. There's many ways in which you can gain your initial access. So one example, phishing or valid accounts. Another example to link that car to something in cybersecurity might be they found out through some intelligence or maybe through talking to an ex-employee what vendor you use for firewalls. And then they can go and look at what the default username and password is for that particular system, and they can just start trying it. Walking past, just trying each of those locks till they get in, right? Another example is they might go and use social media to identify some information about someone. And then they can use that to do a spear phishing attack, a very targeted email or series of messages to someone, could even be SMSs, that get them to think they need to provide information to the attacker. Another step is execution. So here, it's really important. We're getting quite further down into the cyber kill chain. Here's where action is actually being done. Maybe information is being exfiltrated, or servers about to be shut down. Whatever the end goal of the bad actor is. So we have been talking through the course of today and highlighting not just how important it is to govern and secure your human identities, but also your non-human identities. As one example, I'll pull out of a technique in here, system servers account. When I started in this field 10 years ago, no one really thought about those at all. But you would have heard in many sessions today the importance of governing your non-human identities, and I guess how much risk they pose, partly because they have high level of access, but also because they're very rarely monitored. Almost no one is going to a service account and interrogating it. Why are you doing these things? What do you do? They're very much a set and forget type of account. So if you're using things like SailPoint Identity Risk, you're able to get the input of what the anomalous access is, and then again bringing it back to that identity context. What does this account have access to? And also, importantly, because you've used machine identity security, who's the owner of this? Who's actually responsible? Do we need to go and check with them about something? Do we need to tell them we're shutting this account down? There's a whole bunch of processes that you need to be able to even address that challenge. Yes, user execution. Unfortunately, my notes are off, so I'm going to skip to the next one. Persistence, another step in the chain. Create account, valid accounts. These are all about, persistence is all about staying in your network, in your environment. And I guess the reason why this is a part of the kill chain is the longer a bad actor or even an insider threat can stay undetected, the more damage they're going to be able to do, the more money they're going to be able to extract in ransomware, the more information they're going to be able to extract if that's their goal, right? So it's really important we think not just about the immediacy of the moment of them initially getting in, but also what are they doing within it? How are they establishing a place that they can stay? And to this end, if we think about things again, SailPoint Identity Risk, having the anomalous detection of what identities are doing, bringing that back, understanding what to do. Native change detection, so being able to tell SailPoint Identity Security Cloud, hey, if an account gets created here, if an attribute changes in this system, if access gets modified here and you didn't make that happen, do something about it. Also, outlier detection. The ability for SailPoint with that broader context to do peer grouping and to establish, hey, it looks like suddenly, say, Alex has ballooned in the amount of access he's got. That's abnormal. Let's do something about that. And we can see that across all of the different applications, the unstructured data, the cloud infrastructure, all these different pieces of that puzzle, even the machine accounts that he may own. All right, final tactic. We're not going through every step in the kill chain, thank goodness. Privilege escalation. So it's all very well and good that the bad actor has done their reconnaissance, they've been able to get in, they've been able to establish that beachhead or maybe that, get an account they can latch on to, they've been able to have something that's going to persist. but then they're probably going to want to escalate their privileges. That's why they're hanging around. Can they get more access? Are they going to be able to do more damage and then for themselves, enrich themselves, get more money, right? So this can be done by, say, taking over privileged accounts down on the bottom right, or finding a way to use an account that they have and escalate the privilege on that. So this links back to many of the things that we've already talked about. Are we using native entitlement detection to detect when accounts are getting additional access? Are we using outliers to identify when suddenly more access is granted to a particular user? Are we using things like privileged task automation to even make sure that the accounts that have the privilege are not even granted to users? We don't even need to leave accounts. So if we think back to, I don't actually remember when it first came out, but there was a big push back in the day to have people's user account and admin account. The new approach is give them the user account and don't give them an admin account. Give them tasks that they're able to complete at specific times. So unfortunately, if you weren't in it, you would have missed that session with Rick, but come talk to us afterwards and ask us what privileged task automation is and how it can drastically reduce the risk of privilege within your organization. All right, starting now to bring these things together, we talked about the challenge, we talked about the cyber kill chain, what that actually was, we talked about zero trust, and we talked about the connection between various items or steps in the kill chain and how those connected back to identity security. So now let's bring all three together. How can Identity Security Cloud help you deter a cyber attack and assist you in breaking the kill chain? And I guess the point of this slide is about the Atlas platform. I've talked about that shared signals, bring all these pieces together. That isn't possible unless you have something that has a really rich framework of APIs. With SailPoint Atlas, it can call out from events that are triggered within us, say an outlier detection or a native entitlement change detection. We can receive in, so you can actually call and cause events to happen within us, and we can call within our platform, within all of the different components of Identity Security Cloud. They're able to talk to one another, exchange this information, and that's critical to making sure that you have this comprehensive response in terms of identity security. So let's have a look at some examples. Checking my time, 5 minutes left. All right, we can do this. Let's have a look at some examples. So again, coming back to that phishing example, someone clicks on a link, or maybe they do something else. Maybe your DLP solution catches them transferring off a file or a bunch of files that they shouldn't, right? So there's an alert that gets triggered. So that sensor or that cybersecurity tool can then connect into SailPoint, trigger the event that says, hey, we've just noticed that Gary has, you can first, that Gary has transferred off this file. This is the account that he used to do that. And then SailPoint can go check, okay, cool, here's his identity cube, here's all the other access he has, and then determine what an appropriate response would be for what the trigger was and the standing access that he currently has. Maybe let's say Gary was the CEO, we might just want to shut down the account immediately and notify cybersecurity so they can take an action straight away, for example. So, unfortunately I forgot to click through these, apologies. Another example is outlier detection. So if we think about obtaining what the risk was in the situation with Gary, he transferred off that file, it would know that because we're using the outlier detection, we understand where he sits in terms of his peers, how anomalous his access is. So if I jump back to the CIO thing, let's say he wasn't the CIO, we didn't know from his title that his access is very important, but maybe he's just someone working in IT, but we know from his outlier score that actually his access is very high. So then we can still take that action regardless of where he sits in the organization because we have the access context. I guess this is just an example. I'm not going to talk through this particular workflow, but the takeaway that I want you to have is that these responses, the measured response, can be as complex or as simple as your organization needs. So if you want some real world examples, I have some customers that have gone to the length of the security sensor comes in, and if it's medium level, it actually goes to the manager and says, this has been detected, please select what you need to happen in this particular case. So there's all sorts of ways that you can link these together to make sure your organization is getting the risk tie down as well as the efficiency needs. So you don't want to just cut all access every time, right? We would soon all be fined. This is an actual example of what I've talked about. So this is an outlier score, understanding what the rare access is, what the SaaS workflow would look like in terms of determining where the outlier is. Is it low? Just notify. Is it medium? Send out a form. Is it high? Cut the access. And then the user itself, understanding the context within them, and then being able to cut that access in an automated way. And so if I link right back to the start, making sure we've broken that kill chain, all in an automated fashion, because we're not just thinking about, hey, we've got a governance solution and we've got cybersecurity problems, but thinking about identity security. Oh, great, I've done it in time. In conclusion, I guess the challenge is, we're paid to try to get it right every time. For many, especially at the CISO level, their heads are on the chopping block for when breaches happen. And I guess what I want you to take away from today's talk, that if we build that ecosystem around identity, and we make sure at the core of it we understand the context, the access that the person has, or the people have, or the machines in certain cases, that it drastically increases our chances of breaking that kill chain earlier. If you have an isolated email solution that's giving you alerts into your SIEM about phishing, and you have an isolated DLP solution that's feeding you into your SIEM about that, and you have an isolated governance solution that understands the access, that's good. You might deter some breaches. But if they're working together and responding automatically, you're going to break that kill chain much, much earlier. Also keep in mind, I assume this was asserted by legal, we are not a replacement for cybersecurity best practices. You still have to patch your firewalls, you still have to patch your software, you still have to do MFA. All these things are important, but my point is you need to make sure all of your different cybersecurity tools, the way people take pictures of the slides, are linking back to identity security, giving that broader context, and then the appropriate response. Cool, I think that is about it. One thing I did want to advertise,